It's time once again for another installment of the free fishing seminars at Sportsman's Direct.
Well, I want to welcome everybody back to Sportsman's Direct. I'm going to kind of do a impromptu ice rod building seminar here. Going to kind of wing it because I haven't done a seminar actually on rod building before, but I've built quite a few rods. Ice rods, steelhead rods, walleye rods, all kinds of different casting rods. But I started out doing ice rods. Ice rods are a good place to start for a rod builder. A couple of reasons. I mean, one, they're generally pretty simple. You know, they're a lot less expensive to start out. So if you do make a mistake, you're not losing $100. You can start out with really inexpensive glass blanks and pretty basic guides as well and handles. So I mean, you might have on your first rod, you might have $20 in materials to get started as an example, or even less. When I started building rods, I couldn't even call it building rods, but I think a lot of guys have probably done this where you break an open water rod, right? And you got the tip section like this guy here, and then you get a cork handle somewhere, and you epoxy it in, and you call it a custom rod. But it's I've seen it, and I mean we used to do it. I mean, just to get something different than what was out on the market 20 years ago. I mean, there wasn't anything out on the market. I mean, really, as far as a really good quality ice rod, let alone quality ice rod building materials, like rods that were actually dialed in for that specific function. So what we used to end up doing when we started out was we would get solid graphite blanks or solid glass blanks actually, and hand taper them down. And we would just sand them and sand them and sand them. We'd chuck them up in a drill bit, in a drill, and put the drill in the vise and clamp it so that it would run, and we just slowly start tapering the blank down. And I mean hours and hours and hours of hand tapering until we got it where we want to. And then sometimes we'd get a little greedy on the end and try to get that end really, really nice and fine, overheat the blank, and the whole thing would just go, just be toast. So, and you can still do that today, but you don't have to. I mean, there's a lot of products out there on the market. There's a lot of really good blanks out on the market. We've got quite a few here that I designed myself after all those years of messing around. When you guys came in, somebody had a question about, or somebody had mentioned that they built a rod and had problems with it because of the spine. So I guess that's probably where I'm going to start on this with blanks. Now, when blanks are constructed, I mean, everything is not perfectly uniform on the blank. And with like a hollow blank, there's definitely going to be a very defined spine on it, and the spine is actually going to be the stiffest part of the blank. So when you flex that blank, it's going to have a certain position that it's going to want to stay in. Now the same thing applies to the blanks that we use for ice rods. It's probably not as prominent as it is in a hollow blank, because most of the blanks that I deal with for ice rods are going to be solid, whether it's solid fiberglass or solid graphite, or carbon as we'll call them sometimes, solid carbon, graphite, same thing. But they'll still have a spine. And what the spine is, you can take any of these blanks, and when you put a load on them, that blank is going to want to rotate. And you'll feel it if you put a load on it and rotate it in your fingers, you'll feel it start hopping. It'll literally it'll skip over a whole bunch of its rotation and just sit in one spot. And you'll have multiple spines sometimes on a blank, okay? And especially on a ground blank, you can have more than one place where it wants to sit. And your job, since you're building a custom rod, is you're going to want to find the most prominent spot that it wants to sit in. And that's where you're going to build from. And the general rule of thumb, especially for like an ice rod, because you're not really casting, you're going to be fishing vertical, is wherever that rod wants to sit is going to be that position, like I'm showing you here. If it wants to sit there, that's going to be that surface that you're going to put your guides on. Okay, that's the natural way it wants to bend. If you were to put it on the opposite side, you would be putting it exactly opposite of the way that it wants to set up. If you were to put it 45 degrees off of that, every time you flex the rod, it's going to want to try to jump to the position that it naturally wants to sit in. And I've actually got an example of a rod.
Can you try and mark that, John?
Yes, what you do is, if you see on this blank I've got here, I've already got a piece of tape on it, okay, just masking tape. Masking tape is my best friend when I'm building rods. You can do a lot with just a good quality masking tape. But I'll start out by putting a wrap down here somewhere towards the butt section, okay, or the end of the blank, and I'll have a pencil usually really handy, and I like to use just regular pencil. I've heard guys say they like to put a China mark or something right on the blank. I don't want any contamination on this blank at all. But a little bit of graphite, if I were to get it on there from a pencil, it's not going to really hurt anything. But I'll use a pencil mark, and I'll put a mark after I've got that.
So you mark the tape?
Yep, I'll mark it right on the tape, and then that becomes my line of sight for where I'm going to lay all my guides out. Now, what I was saying is I've got a rod over here that actually somebody sent to me once upon a time that was trying to sell me custom rods. And one of the reasons why I didn't end up buying rods for them for the store was because if you look at this rod right now, I'm loading it. Does everybody see what's happening with the guides? Yeah, they're all kicking off by like 25, 30 degrees. And in this case, he had even ground a flat spot into the wooden handle on it, which means that I can't even try to compensate anything. So, anyways, so that was kind of an oops. But that's what will happen. Now, in an open water rod, if you're not on the spine the right way, and I'll just go into that a little bit real quick. We were talking about ice rods, but on an open water rod, it'll affect your casting accuracy. Because as that rod goes back and it loads up and it flexes, okay, it's going to want to try to rotate a little bit. So when you're casting, when it unloads, it's almost going to unload almost sidearm. And you'll see that on a two-piece rod, because if you're fishing with it and casting a lot, you'll notice down on your rod tip that it starts to walk around, right? I mean, some of that can just be from form, right? If you're putting a side load or something when you're casting, but sometimes it's because that spine is off when that rod was built. And factory rods will generally not be like perfectly on the spine. I mean, if they're mass-produced rods, that's one of the advantages to building your own rod, is that you can be very precise about that stuff and build it exactly the way you want. You can make sure that those guides are right on the spine. On a bait cast rod, if we were going to do an ice rod and we were going to do bait cast style, we would do it just the opposite of where the natural way that rod would want to load, because in bait casting it's going to be loading backwards, right, the opposite direction. So we would put the guides on the opposite side. Now, I'll digress a little bit here. I played around a lot with bait casters back when I was doing the North American ice fishing circuit, because I was trying to get away from line twist, and so I liked bait cast reels because they didn't give you any line twist in memory. So I went into a binge for a while where I was building ice rods, and I ended up kind of splitting the difference and building what we call an acid rod, which is a bait caster where the guides actually wrap around. And they're kind of really interesting to build, because you got to really be paying attention to what you're doing. But so you start out with the spine, up on the top like a regular bait caster, but then you take the guides and you roll it around until it's coming off the bottom. So there's different examples up here later. You guys want to look at them that I did their acid rods. But the advantage to wrapping that way, and again, this is the fun of doing your own custom stuff, is that I wanted to use the St. Croix style spring bobber back then, and the only way I could do that on the bait caster was to get the guides to rotate around the other direction. And so I built a bunch of rods up that I used when I used to tournament fish that were bait casters and that had the St. Croix spring bobber on top. So that's the fun of custom building. You can get exactly what you want. You're not at the mercy of the manufacturers. Now, there's a lot of good rods out there, though, production rods nowadays. So, a lot of guys that are doing this now are really just doing it because something really special about catching fish on something you built. It's like when I used to bow hunt. I mean, I used to love to make all my own arrows and stuff like that, and fletch them, and it was just cool. Not only was it, cost effective to fletch, but it was just fun to shoot an animal with an arrow that you fletched and with blades that you hand sharpened and all that. So that's the spine, which is where you really have to start out. Okay, you want to have the spine set up and marked properly, and then one of the little tricks I learned over the years, and find somebody, I guess, that you know that's got braces still. Parents, if you got kids that have braces, I think they still use rubber bands on braces, don't they? The little tensioners. This is a little package that I've had for many, many years, and they're actually, I played with one a little while ago, and it started to break down, so they lost their elasticity. But these are little tiny rubber bands. I use these on the rods to position the guides. So after I have, and I also use them on the rods to set up kind of roughly where I think my guides are going to be. But I'll use these little rubber bands, and I'll put them on the blank, and I know this one's going to blow up on me as soon as I do it, but put them on the blank and kind of wrap them over each other a couple of times until they're nice and tight on the blank, and then space them out on the blank. Like on a 24-inch rod, my general rule of thumb would be 3 guides minimum plus a tip top. It's probably going to end up being 4 guides plus a tip top, depending on how the rod loads up. There's no real rule for that for ice rods. I'll just tell you that right now. It's kind of a touchy-feely thing. You just got to kind of, play with it and feel it yourself. But I would put the rubber bands and space them out on here for as many guides as I was planning on putting on, and then literally run a line underneath these little rubber bands, and then load the rod up, pulling on the line. And what you're going to look for is a nice clean bend in the rod, as close to natural as you can get it. So you want to try to approach what that blank is going to bend if you didn't have guides on it. So you get a nice uniform load on the rod. And you kind of adjust those rubber bands until you get a nice uniform load. And the other thing you're looking for is you don't want to see like any exaggerated flat spots going through. You want a nice smooth arc with the line. Now, when you're done with that and you're happy with where they're located, you look at it, and then what I'll do is I'll take a ruler and I'll measure all my distances, because you're making a custom rod, so you not only want it to perform well, you want it to look nice too. You want it to be pleasing to the eye. So what I try to do is I try to make sure that my spacing, it's more than try, I always do this. I make sure that my spacing is getting slowly closer as we move to the tip, so that I'm not going to have a greater gap between my tip top guide and my first guide than I have down here. It's going to be there's a pattern to it, so it's going to the guides are going to get closer and closer together as they get towards the tip. And you can play with those numbers until they're nice and even. It's totally up to you. Again, it's a custom rod. But then after I get them to where the numbers are nice and even, say I'm going a 3-inch space, and a 2-inch space, and a 1.5, and then a 1 down there at the end, then I'll load it up again and make sure I didn't screw anything up. Okay, because you may have to tweak it a little bit. It all depends on the blank. So after that, you're going to be, putting your guides in underneath those little rubber bands. So that's the other value of those rubber bands, because they're already on there now. They're in the right spot. I might mark them with a piece of masking tape so that they don't move on me. Okay, I'll put a little piece of masking tape behind the rubber band, so that in case when I'm playing with it, I don't slide the rubber band around, right? You don't want to go back and remeasure. It's probably not a bad idea to write everything down when you do it, what my spacing was, just in case. But I'm going to slide the guides underneath the rubber band, and we'll start wrapping them. But I'm not going to jump into wrapping right now. I'm going to talk about some other components here first.
Are there some other options if you don't have rubber bands?
Yep. I know Justin says he likes to use masking tape. Okay. Some guys will use heat-sensitive glue. Okay, like similar glue, like the waiter patch kind of glue. Okay, that you heat up. But you got to be careful if you're messing with any of that stuff, because one of the reasons I like the little rubber bands is they're clean. They don't leave anything on the blank. If you start using different glues and things, number one, you can leave something there that might impact your threads later on as you're wrapping it. Or it could, I've even heard of guys using super glue, which I really don't recommend, because you have no adjustability then. You kind of, no pun intended, you're stuck. Wherever you put it, that's where it's going to be. And what's that?
The rod tip glue to keep the guide.
Yeah, the rod tip glue is the same thing, and I've got some up here which is basically, it's almost the same as the waiter patch material. It's a little harder density, but this rod tip glue, which is what you use to put your rod tips on. You heat it's a heat sensitive glue. It's basically like a hot glue gun type glue. But if you go online and look, I'm sure there's a bunch of guys that use a bunch of different ways to hold the guides in place when they start out. It's one of the toughest things, especially on ice rods when you're dealing with these really fine blanks. You know, getting something that's going to hold that guide in the right spot for you until you can get the thread going up on there. So that's the blank itself. The other important part of the rod is going to be your handle. I mean, the rod's going to feel, it's going to feel as good as you can make it as far as how it loads and everything with the guides. But the handle is it's a real personal thing too, right? Some guys like, much bigger diameter handles. Some guys like short handles. Some guys want something longer. Some guys like wood. You got all different materials. You got wood. You got the foam, right? This EVA foam. And then you got cork is probably one of your most common handle materials. And then you've got combinations of all of those, right? You got cork, and then you got the regular, like an open water style handle kit. So like on this one too, right? The regular style where you can thread it and tighten it up. Myself, I generally stay really simple, especially on ice rods, and I've built a lot of different styles. But I generally go with a very simple cork grip with maybe some detail rings on them, like so. Now, these handles are already epoxied together. Most of them will come with a hole in them already. Okay, different sizes, and that is going to be in comparison to the way that I started building rods, and I don't even know if any of these ones I have up here were built completely from scratch. This one was, actually. If you were going to build one of these handles from scratch, it's crazy labor intensive. Okay, it's expensive too. These cork rings will run, I haven't priced them lately, but 60 cents minimum, Justin? Is that what they're going for now?
Really low grade.
That's for really low grade,
yeah,
right? So the cork's graded. It's like grade A, AA, AAA. It goes up based on how pure the cork is and how little of the hard spots that it has in it when it's finished. Basically by how much imperfection it has. But the way we would end up building a handle, if we were going to build with these rings, they're half inch width. Okay, and they come. You can see these two are different diameters. So you would choose what size grip you were going to really try to shoot for, what size handle, diameter-wise. Then you would have to select the cork rings based on the grade. Okay, how much quality am I going to want to spend, or how much money am I going to want to spend on the handle? And then you go for the ID too, the diameter in the center, which is going to be determined a lot by the blank that you're building on, because you want to get as close as you can to that blank diameter. But then you take all these cork rings, you put a little bit of glue in between each one. You'd actually mount them onto the blank first. Again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but you'd mount them all onto the blank. And I don't have my jig here for this, but you'd get epoxy on there, you get them all lined up, you'd stack them up to the length you want, and you put them in this little fixture that compresses them so that it squeezes that epoxy in there evenly. And then you let it set up for at least 24 hours. And then the fun really starts. Because depending on how messy you were and how straight you got them and how centered the hole was, now you got to sand that baby all the way down. And it's on your blank too already. Now, ice rod you can get away with not mounting it on the blank, but if you're doing an open water rod with a big difference in diameter going down, with a lot of taper down there, you have to customize each of these holes to that blank by diameter as you're putting them on. It's a ton of work. Okay, so any of you guys want to do that and you want to talk about doing it, I'll gladly stay after and explain in more detail, but it's a lot of work and it's a lot of money. Which is why we sell a lot of prefab handles for ice rods, including these guys here. The same thing can be said with a kit. Now, if you were to buy a handle kit that would have, you know, the center portion, and it's going to have the foregrip, and it's going to have the, you know, the butt, and it's probably going to come with some spacers, different materials inside to take up the gap. You're still looking at a considerable amount of time to build a handle like this, which is why last year I decided I was going to pre-build handles and just leave them with a blank inside already, a hollow blank, so the customers can just drop their ice rods in. Now you might have to do a little bit of, you know, you're going to have to maybe open that hole up or open up that blank that's in the center so that it fits your blank properly. But, you know, you're only a drill bit away from doing that. So it's a lot less work than building all the way from scratch. So we got a couple of different handles. We call this one the no butt, because it doesn't have an extended butt on it. But there's rods on the market that use these already. You've got call this a Tennessee grip, basically because of the way that it's shaped. It comes generally in 2 pieces. It comes in 1 and 2 pieces, but you know how it's got the taper here. Anyways, you can get these and you're literally just dropping the blank in. Now, the blanks are probably not going to fit these diameters perfectly, okay? So you do have to do a little customization, but it's pretty simple customization because you got your friend masking tape again, all right? So customization that you're going to have to do to drop it in there and get it to fit is literally you're going to be wrapping some masking tape up, and I use a 3-point process generally. I'm going to have masking tape down towards the end of my blank, midsection, and then up just a little bit higher than where it's going to fit or where it's going to end inside my handle. So I'm going to leave a little bit of dead space up there on the top that I'm just going to build some epoxy up right at the end.
Are you threading the blank straight down
Yep,
to the bottom?
drop
or
it right in. Yep.
No, but I mean like all the way, the full length of the...
Yep.
Okay, the
But
grip?
you don't have to. Okay, that's a good question because that's going to lead me to another point here. And later on, you guys can come up and look at some of these rods. But you know, when you're buying blanks, you're locked into the manufacturer's length, right, to a certain degree. But you do have some flexibility. I mean, you can cut these blanks, right? You can make them shorter. You know, generally, I mean, if you cut them off the tip, you're going to take some of that speed away on the tip, right? You're going to take the flexibility away because you're going to be going into thicker and thicker blank. But on the butt section, on the end, you can cut it back here too. So you can shorten these blanks up. And you get a feel for really easy just by where you grip it, you know, what that's going to do. But you can also lengthen these blanks. And a lot of guys don't do this, and I don't know why, but it's so simple. How many of you guys are bow hunters? Anybody a bow hunter sitting out here? Okay. You got any old aluminum arrow shafts laying around? Okay. Aluminum arrow shafts are great. Even the new carbon shafts are fine. But what you do with your old aluminum shafts, and this is an old double X78, so any of you guys that are out there that have been shooting as long as I have, you know, this was an expensive arrow shaft in its day once upon a time. But after you can't straighten them anymore, and now I shoot carbon anyway, so all the aluminums are all retired. These guys are perfect for extending, getting some extra length out of your ice rods and even open water rods, honestly. I mean, these blanks are really strong and they're very flexible, okay? So what you can do is cut this arrow shaft down. Now, I wouldn't recommend going, you know, I would recommend leaving at least a couple of inches of your rod blank down in here, okay? So this is like a 5.5-inch handle, but I can cut 5.5 inches of this shaft, this arrow shaft, and epoxy it down inside this handle, and then drop my blank into that arrow shaft, okay? And so the arrow shaft actually extends my blank down into that handle. So I can get like another 3.5, 4 inches, you know, by just using that arrow shaft, and nobody's ever going to know. It's the only person that's going to know is you, and it's down in the handle. It's aluminum or carbon, whatever you want, but it's going to still transmit every little bit of vibration and feel down into that handle, maybe even better than that blank would. So, I mean, it's a great way to get a different action out of your rod blank. I think every one of these rods up here has got an aluminum arrow shaft down in the handle, except that wooden one down there, and then this pistol grip that was one of the first rods I ever made with Phil sitting back there. Happy birthday, Phil, by the way. Happy birthday out there to everybody in YouTube land too. At 74, right?
Yeah.
And it's really cool that Phil is here, because honestly, I would not be up here talking about rod building at all if it wasn't for Phil Morse, period. Because Phil taught me everything that I know about rod building. And he's still building away. He's still building rods.
You can't see him as well anymore though.
That's right, can't see as well. One of the other cool things you can do, especially for ice fishermen, is with these arrow shafts, you can actually leave that pointy end sticking out the end if you want. Okay, and most of these up here, even though I don't have them showing, I've got the receivers in down there. And there was a time when I used to leave that field point, or it would be a broadhead tip without the broadheads in it, in the end of my rods, especially early season and late season, just as extra safety. Because when you think about it, I don't build rods that way from a production standpoint and resell them, mostly because I wouldn't want to get sued if something failed on it. Okay, it's not a guarantee that it could save your life, but when I used to fish a lot, early season and late season, I would leave that point in there, because think about it, when you're walking around out there on the ice, what do you normally have in your hand? You got your fishing rod in your hand, right? You got those spikes hanging around your neck. It's a lot easier when you go through just to take the rod and, stick it into the ice. It might save your life. Okay, I can't guarantee it, because I don't know how strong that's actually going to be when you're done. But when I was building these rods once upon a time, I built them intentionally so that I could do that. Never had to use it, thank God. I never went through to the to the point that I needed to use it to climb back out. But it was just a thought. So you can take that for what it is, but it's not going to hurt to do it if you want to build it that way. But these rods were all built that way with the receiver on the end. The other thing that I found when using the aluminum arrow shaft on there that was kind of nice too, was that by leaving that receiver end on there, when I was doing a true custom cork, okay, I could chuck that end up into my drill and use that to turn the cork for final sanding. And then when I was done, I just unthread it, and then nobody's the wiser. So it just made it easier to sand as well. So anyways, that's my arrow shaft spiel, which I told that to a few guys on the phone when they called, when they said, I wish you had, you want to buy a 34-inch blank, but they wish you had like a 36. And I'm like, well, just use an arrow shaft, you get another couple inches out of it pretty easy. And it's amazing how many guys don't do that. So that's the handle deal. You can get really creative with handles. You don't just have to do straight handles. This is one that Phil made for me a long time ago. It's been modified a little bit since then, but this was made out of an old hockey stick handle. Wood, the old wooden laminated hockey sticks. That wood is beautiful in there. It's all laminated. You can take it and you can sand it down and shape it. You can get some really beautiful, elegant looking, finishes by messing with that stuff. Again, it's custom. You can do it. You can do whatever you want. You can make it pistol grip. You can make it a straight grip. Make it fat, skinny. You can split grip it. You can do whatever you want. As far as epoxy goes, I got asked this earlier tonight before we started the seminar. This is important. The epoxy that you use for wrapping your rod for your guides, for your thread, is not the same epoxy that I would use in the handle, or I should say that conversely. The stuff that I use in the handle is going to normally be a much faster setting epoxy. It's going to generally set up in like a couple hours, okay, so that you can work with the rod. But the epoxy you're going to use to wrap the thread is going to be a much slower curing epoxy. Okay, as a rule, the faster the epoxy cures, the more brittle it's going to be when it's at full cure. Your slower cure epoxies are going to be much more flexible when they're at full cure. So on your rod, your slow cure epoxy is not going to be as prone to fracturing when it's under load slow cure stuff because it's never going to be as brittle. Whereas the stuff inside your handle, you can afford to have it a little more brittle because this isn't flexing like your rod is. It's going to flex a little bit, but maybe not. I mean, depending on what your materials you use are. But so you don't want to use. The point is, you definitely don't want to use fast cure epoxy up on your guides. That'd be a no-no. You're going to end up fracturing the finish all around the base of the guide. Some more. There's different epoxies up here. I've got a 5-minute epoxy, which is something I would use for the handle. Okay, it's actually not gonna cure fully in 5 minutes, but that's your working time on it. Okay, and you gotta bear that in mind when you're doing this stuff. This is some newer stuff. This Pro Paste. This is some good stuff to use for handles as well. Got some Chroma Seal here, which is a color preserver. Now, this actually goes on your threads on the rod to help seal the color in. It helps protect it from UV. It helps stop the penetration a little bit of the actual epoxy, so it actually gives you a little cleaner finish. It doesn't. If you don't use it, what will end up happening sometimes is as you're building up the epoxy, it can soak into the threads, and you can start to get some flat spots if you're not careful. This helps prevent that. It also gives you what the color is going to look like after you've used the sealant on the color before you use the actual epoxy, because if you don't use it, the epoxy will kind of bleed into that thread unless you use a color preserved thread, which I generally don't do. But it'll come out different than what you were expecting. So this kind of gives you a known finish. You know what it's going to look like after you've set this up on there. It also tends to help protect the threads a little bit, so that if you're not going to build right away, you can mess around with that blank a little bit. You can load it up with the guides on there and everything without having your epoxy finish on there too, because you don't want to test it before once you put that epoxy on there, you're done. I mean, it's a lot of work to strip it all back down. So the color preserver actually will help set it up a little bit so that you can mess around with that rod a little bit. I think I've even fished with them before. Have you done that? Phil, fished with them with just the color preserver on there? It's kind of dangerous because it's a water base, so it will come off if you get it wet. Other product up here is LumaSeal. This is a urethane based product. There's a couple of other types of materials out there. I think another brand is it UV40, the other one that's out. There's a few of them that are out there. This is a flexible finish. You can actually use this on your rod itself, on the blank. So in cases where you may have like this glass blank is unfinished, it's just a ground blank, okay? You can actually put a high gloss finish on it with the LumaSeal. So guys will do that, and there's marbling and other different coloring type processes you can use on the blank, and they'll use a urethane base to it, and the urethane gives it flexibility. So again, it stops it from cracking. It's very thin, and that's important, right? You want the finish cracking on your rod. One of the other products that you use, I don't have a sample of it up here, is FlexCoat Fusion, which is it's a spray paint, but it also has urethane in it. You can generally use any urethane-based paint on the rod blanks. So if you want to change color or whatnot, you can use like a urethane base. What do you do on the rod if you don't use a regular reel seat like these? Back in the day, we did a lot of different things, and these rods are all got various ways to fasten the reel on. This one has hockey stick tape, which I used to use a lot. This one's got colored electrical tape. These other ones have got a combination of electrical tape and even some rings on there. I'll tell you that what I use now on anything that doesn't have a true reel seat like this on it are these cold snap reel bands. These things are fantastic. They're just a super strong silicone band. Okay, Cold Snap sells these in kits 16 that you can do up like 4 rods on an ice rod. Honestly, you only need 3 of them really on an ice rod, sometimes 2 if it's just like a really ultralight rod with a small reel on it. But the way these guys work is pretty slick. You stick your end of your rod in there and just snap them on. This tool that comes with the cold snap band just is used to expand it. The only reason why I bring this up from a rod building standpoint is it just simplifies. It's one less thing you have to worry about when you're building your first rod. I mean, these bands do a fantastic job of holding them on there. They don't ruin your cork. Like if I were to try to strip off this tape right now off of these older rods here, it's going to take any of the filler that was on there that was helping that cork to look real nice. It's going to rip it right out of the holes on that cork, and the cork's never going to look the same again. But with these real bands, it doesn't do that. So it doesn't leave sticky stuff on there. It doesn't rip the cork apart. They're nice. They're soft. They're comfortable. It's a really cool product. So I encourage you, if you're going to use just a regular cork handle to go this route. You could use it on wood handles too. It'll be just as effective on a wood handle or on an EVA handle like this one too. I mean, these are really strong. Let's see. Let's jump back to the rod blank with the guides on it. I'm gonna do a quick little demo on a way that I learned to wrap rods, and my cameraman will have to follow me. I'm gonna go over to this chair over here, and I'm just gonna do a quick little demonstration. This is my technique for rod wrapping, and I've spent many hours watching TV, literally, doing this. And you can use any kind of little cup you want. Put it down on the floor with your thread in it. I take my rod wrapping thread, go around my leg, generally 3 times. And I haven't tried it on this chair, but the idea is to get that thread trapped under your leg. This is a real short chair here, and it helps if you've got some cushion on there. But and I'm going to try not to shake for you guys too much. I've got a bad habit of shaking. I guess I'll do a little quick demo about how I start my thread. Generally it's 1.5 like free wraps, and then I can tilt that blank a little bit so that that thread kind of overwraps it, and you'll feel it catch. Okay, so it'll actually catch the thread, and then I'll start just wrapping. And if I was really set up to do this, I would have some tape handy where I would actually hold this tag end back out of my way. But I'm just going to wrap, and I'm just going to slowly hold the tension constant, and I'm going to wrap down towards my leg. And what I like about this is I can actually feel the tension that I have on the blank. But this is just a little demo, so I know I'm over wrapping a little bit here. I'm not paying close attention. I don't have good light. But if I want to pull more thread out, I literally just take some pressure off my leg by picking up my heel. If I pick up my heel, I take some tension off. I can pull it up, then I can go right back down. So that's my sitting on the chair rod wrapping technique. Now, what it really helps if you're going to do this is to have a table or something close by that you're going to have a little razor blade, the tool that we use a little loop to pull the thread underneath to finish wrap. I don't have one up here, but you really wouldn't be able to see it. But it's basically a little loop of. I usually will use like braid, like a heavy power braid, like 15. What's that?
The old strand.
Yeah, I don't like strand because I like to use the braid, but
You don't want anything.
yeah, something high visibility, but a little loop of it, because when you finish off your wrap, what you're going to do is you're going to pull that tag end of the thread underneath several wraps, and that's what's going to lock everything in. And for you guys, when you come to the workshop, we'll get into that and we'll show you up close, because it's up here. It's just I'm not going to be able to show you anyways, but I just wanted to show you one of my techniques for wrapping, because you don't need any equipment to do this, and you can really do it at your leisure. You can do it at the kitchen table, and I mean, it works. It's effective. Those rods up there were all wrapped the same way. I've got a power wrapper back there now that I have to learn how to use, because I'll be doing higher volumes of stuff. But
Do you flatten your thread at all when you do that, or counterclockwise to flatten it out, or you?
no, I wrap, but I don't wrap with too much tension. I wrap fairly lightly.
Okay.
And if you wrap with too much tension, you're not going to damage a solid blank. Now, if you were doing a hollow blank, you can damage the blank by putting too much pressure on the thread. But I like to leave the thread with, not too much tension on it, because at the end, it's easier to flatten out the threads, like you were just talking about, to burn it, what we'll call burnishing them, where we flatten them out and pack in any places where we might have a little bit of a gap. One of the things I've noticed on a lot of the production rods lately is that kind of amazed at how many gaps there are in the thread. When you look at the threads up really close,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like if you do a really nice job wrapping thread, nobody's ever going to know that it's thread. People are going to look at it and go, wow, is that like tape, if they don't know any better, right? They're going to think, they're actually not going to see the individual threads. If you do your job properly, you won't even see the individual threads, other than if you're changing colors or something. It should look like one continuous color. And I'll actually pass out this little guy here. You can take a look at it. I'll show the cameraman here first, but this is just a little piece of blank that I will use when I'm testing different colors and testing color preserver. Remember I was saying how I use the color preserver, and then you can get different colors with epoxy, whether you use color preserver or not. A lot of times I will practice on just a little piece of blank material before I start wrapping my rod, so that I get an idea of exactly what it's going to look like when I'm done. And a lot of those are dual colors. Now, you can wrap two threads simultaneously, and you can actually get it to alternate. So you can have like a gold thread and a red thread right next to each other. There's a sample of that on there. You can do black and red. You can do whatever you want and get some really cool looking thread wraps on the rod. But it's kind of a good idea to do a little test, to see what it's going to look like, because once you get into a rod, you got some time involved. So figure out what you like first before you actually dive into the rod with your thread colors and everything. And the colors will change when you get epoxy on them and with the color preserver on them. They don't look just like that. And my experience with the thread doesn't have color preserver already in it. You can buy threads that have color preserver like already in the thread, but for me those colors have always been a little more muted, and they're not as vibrant as the colors without the thread without the color preserver. So I don't care for them too much. So most of the threads I have don't already have they don't have color preserver in them.
Is that a special thread, or do you use like stuff?
It's just a nylon thread.
So about stuff like you're sewing up a shirt or?
Nylon thread is nylon thread. These come in different sizes. It's a good point to bring up, is that I generally wrap with size 8 thread, which is a very small diameter thread. The thread sizes go all the way up. I've got some old good rod over there that's size E, which when you compare it to this, it's like rope. And you might think that it's easier to wrap with the real heavy stuff. I find that it's not easier to wrap with the real heavy stuff. To go up one size up to size D thread, it isn't so bad, but the thread, depending on the thread that you use, you're going to add weight to that blank. I guess that's something I'll touch on right now, is that the way this blank feels right now with no guides on it is not the way it's going to feel after you get guides on it. Especially when you're talking about like whipping it around like a lightsaber, right? This thing feels like a really stiff toothpick right now. After I put guides on this, it's going to feel much softer. So one of the other rules of thumb with your guides, or with your blanks in general, is just know that this blank is going to feel and react much softer once you get the guides on it, because you're adding weight to it. Okay, and so where I'm going with that weight is, the thicker diameter thread you use, the more weight you're going to add to this rod blank. Okay, because you're going to have to, that thread's going to soak up that epoxy, and it's going to add considerable weight. These blanks are really light, and you'll feel it on a rod. If you take this, you know, this rod, this blank right now, and if I were even to put guides on it, if I were to just put thread in those different spots and wrap it and put the epoxy on it, it's going to feel totally different when I'm done, and it's going to feel much softer. So, you know, just know that that blank is going to feel softer once you get the guides on there. And it's just kind of one of those things you just have to learn through experience, and that's one of the fun parts about building rods, is that you kind of really don't know what you're going to get until you're finished, you know, but you just know it's going to be cool. So putting the epoxy on, once we get the guides and everything on there, and we've got them wrapped on, however we choose to wrap them, whether we're going to wrap them, and you know, sitting in the chair style, or you know, using a conventional rod wrapper, like I think that's what we got up here. This is a hand wrapper, so this hand wrapper is basically going to be a couple of V's that you're going to rest your rod blank in. It's got a place to hold the thread, a little spring tensioner on there, and you're going to rotate it. It's just going to be held nice and stable for you, and depending on the model you get, there'll be actually a tensioner that'll actually can hold it, so you can walk away and go have a cup of coffee or go check the score on the football game, you know, in between, and so it won't move on you. Whereas once you sit down in a chair and start doing that, when you got that thread wrapped around you, you're like, you ain't going anywhere. So you know, you're kind of stuck. So this is pretty nice as far as being able to move around and stop and pause and everything, but pretty inexpensive. I don't, what are these, Justin? They're like $30 or 36, I think. Hey, look at that! Nobody put a price on it. But so yeah, under $40, you can get a wrapper. Now, once it's all wrapped up, you got your guides on there, and you're going to put the epoxy on. You're going to want to really take your time in this step, because this is the final operation here, and you're dealing with epoxy that, you know, once it gets on there, it can make a big mess. So I'm going to start by talking about mixing the epoxy first. Really want to be careful mixing your epoxy. There are 1-part rod finishes out there, okay? They're all right, they work. You got to take your time with them. They're generally on the thicker side, I've found, so they're a little harder to work with. Okay, but they do work, and a lot of guys use them, and you don't have to worry about mixing if you do use them. But what I'm going to talk about right now is the 2-part epoxies. You're going to want to mix these very, very precisely. Okay, you got 2 parts to the epoxy, an A and a B, a resin and a hardener. If you don't get them mixed just right, you're going to end up with epoxy that'll never cure. It's never going to fully cure. It's going to stay tacky, maybe forever, which is a real pain in the neck, because you want a nice hard finish. You want it hard, but you want it flexible. So you want it to last, but you don't want it to get, you know, all scratched up and everything. And its job is to hold that thread and add strength around that guide. Now, when you're mixing that epoxy, I highly recommend using a real mixing cup of some sort. Another thing that you can use that I've used in the past is a piece of tin foil, and I learned that one from Phil. And the reason for that is, if you just grab any old cup, okay, like you go grab an old margarine cup or something, number one, you don't know what it had in there. If it had a little bit of oil or something in there, some residue, that's going to get mixed in with your epoxy. Or it might have a little bit of a chemical reaction. A lot of plastics don't like each other. Okay, and if you get a little chemical reaction going, you don't know what you're putting into that epoxy. It may never harden up. I had that happen to me on a very expensive rod. I got really cheap. I was in a hurry. I grabbed a little cup. It was probably like a medicine cup or something that we use for cough syrup. I mixed my epoxy in it. The darn rod never, you know, fully cured like it should. And I never knew if it was the way I mixed the epoxy or if it was something from contamination. So just eliminate that completely. Tinfoil, you can make a little tinfoil pad. Tinfoil is not going to be reactive either, but it can be a little bit messy to mix on that tinfoil if you got a lot of epoxy. So the little cups and the little stirrers are really cheap. I think there's like 10 of them here or something for $1.99. So you can do 10 rods for $1.99. It's a cheap insurance policy for mixing your epoxies.
Question.
Sure.
It's just enough for one guide at a time?
No, I generally mix for the whole rod. The only time I would mix for half a rod is like if I'm doing like a 13-foot 2-piece steelhead rod and I got a ton of guides, then I might do half of the rod today and put it in the dryer overnight and then do the other half tomorrow if I'm only doing one rod. But if you only got 4, 5, 6 guides, mix yourself plenty of epoxy so that you don't run out halfway through, okay? Just mix more than enough, it's especially until you get some experience level of how much epoxy you need to mix. Mix it up really good, but there's also mixers that they sell now, which are really cool that I didn't have back, 10, 15 years ago, that you can actually put the epoxy in there and the mixer will just spin, and it's got a little magnet in there that rolls around and carefully mixes it. Now, you want to be careful when you're mixing that you don't get a bunch of air bubbles in your epoxy, because those air bubbles are going to have to come out at some time. And it may take them a while. And while that epoxy is curing is not when you want to be worrying about whether or not your air bubbles are coming out. So try to be conscious of that when you're mixing. The different size tubes or different size containers of epoxy will give you different options as to how you can dispense it. The bigger bottles will come with a little push top dispenser that are designed to meter that epoxy out like 1 milliliter per pump. Okay, so you know that one pump, you do one pump of your resin and one pump of your hardener, you're getting the same amount. For smaller batches, there's also syringes, so you can measure right down to a cc. Okay, so you want to measure it very close. The other option, and I don't think I have any up here, is we sell little packets that have so many grams of the part A and the part B in there. It's a really good option for guys, especially if you're just getting into this and you don't know how many rods you're gonna even build. I mean, even for guys that build a lot, you squeeze out those. They're like little ketchup packets. You squeeze them out, you know you've got the exact amount of the hardener and the resin. You're done. There is no guesswork on it. To me, that's about as bulletproof as it can get. But if you're building a lot or you're doing big rods, you might have to do more than one packet. So those guys will buy more volume on that stuff. When you're putting your epoxy on after you got your epoxy mixed, your rod's going to go in some sort of a dryer. Now this is CRB dryer. This one is a 9 RPM unit. This thing's job is to rotate that rod of yours at a nice constant velocity so that when you put that epoxy on, the epoxy doesn't sag. Now you can imagine if I take that rod and I put epoxy on there and I just let it sit stationary, it's just going to get a big drip and it's just going to all sag to one side until it hardens up. But the idea of that dryer is going to rotate that rod slowly, 9 RPMs, and allow that epoxy to give a perfectly cylindrical finish. I mean, it's going to be nice and uniform all the way around. But you got to get the epoxy on there first, okay? So you're going to use these little brushes, and this is kind of an art form too, and if you're shaky like me, it can be very challenging. But you're going to get a little bit of that epoxy and put it on that brush, and you're going to, as that rod's rotating, you're going to slowly drag that epoxy back down the guide and down your thread. And generally, you're going to be about a 1/16 over at the very end. I like to go a little bit past the thread, and this is actually a production rod, and they took it right to the edge of the thread, which means that they didn't get all the threads, which is the advantage you have of building your own custom rod, because you're going to make it perfect, right, just the way you want it. But so you're going to drag that epoxy down until you get a nice, smooth, even coat of epoxy. And if you're real careful and you know, you're gonna get a nice even coat on all of them. You're not gonna have this one with a great big wad of epoxy on it and this one with barely enough. So again, it's work, right? I mean, it's kind of like an art form. You're making something special, so you can control how much time and energy you want to put into it.
What do you do if you don't have a dryer?
Well, if you don't have a dryer, somebody wants to run back in, that's probably mounted to the table, isn't it? But these rods were all built using an old rotisserie motor, which rotates pretty darn close to that 9 RPM, 6 to 9, 6 to 10 RPMs. It's loud, which used to give me a sense of security because when it was rotating, if I was upstairs, I could hear it making its wonderful dynamo hum down in the basement, you know, as it was rotating around. But it's basically just a modified rotisserie motor. But this is much more refined. Nice thing about these off-the-shelf units are that they're already set up to accept your handle or whatever. They're going to be a little more forgiving. This one's actually set up for doing ice jigs.
I don't even want to know what that is.
Right now. But yeah, so this is old rotisserie motor with a modified base on it that I would either have at my house. I would have had it bolted to my workbench, and then right now it's, like I said, it's set up for doing ice jigs. So a big hello out there to Kevin Brantner, because I know he kind of knows what that is. But if I wasn't doing ice jigs on this thing, I would have it set up with a funnel, literally just a funnel. And the funnel would sit on here, open end, and then I'd run rubber bands across the funnel in a crisscross pattern, set the blank, or my rod, into the center of those rubber bands. Can you guys picture that, what I'm talking about? So you literally got an X of rubber bands, and the rubber bands are going to
I'll bring mine in the next time. I got 2 of those I built
Yep.
30 years ago.
Yep. So it'll hold the rod in there centered. You want it centered because you don't want the thing doing an oddball whoop-de-whoop as it's going around, because that's not going to help the epoxy to get nice and uniform. So that's the rotisserie motor. Now that you guys aren't going to buy my rod dryers, but it works.
John,
You know?
I used a little timer off of an old refrigerator that rotates, I don't know if it's 15 RPMs, and I just screwed it to, I made a little base like you got.
Yep.
Only I got a long leg on the base, I just clamp it to the tabletop.
That's what I do with that one here. It's just clamped to the tabletop with a C-clamp. They work. I mean, all you're trying to do is rotate that blank around so that the epoxy dries uniformly. You can put additives in there. This one actually has it. This one has, in the epoxy when I mixed it, this one has, I had a kick for a while where I was using crushed opal dust in my epoxy to give it a nice deep 3D finish. It looks really cool. You can use it on any color, and it's pretty cheap. But so yeah, there's crushed opal dust in that one. You don't want to add crazy stuff in there to your epoxy because, again, you don't want to have a bad reaction to it. One of the other things I'll say about the epoxy is, when you're done putting the epoxy on the rod, don't throw your cup of epoxy away. The stuff you didn't use, set it on the table close by to where your rod is wrapping. And when you come down and you want to check to see if your rod is, how the epoxy is doing as far as hardening, don't be tempted to touch your rod. Touch the cup, okay? Because you don't want to leave it, if it's not done and you touch that rod blank somewhere, you're going to leave a fingerprint on it. But it sounds silly, but I guarantee you there's guys out there listening to me right now that have done that. I did it. Okay, there's one honest guy. Two in this crowd. So yeah, me too. So yeah, leave your. That goes for anything you're working on, guys. Not just wrapping, rod wrapping. If you're using any kind of a 2-part epoxy or anything, and you got something you got to let set up, even paint, put a little test patch somewhere. Don't touch the actual product you're working on. Touch the little, test watch or whatever you got laying off to the side. It'll tell you a lot too. I mean, we actually had a repair rod that we were working on a couple of weeks ago. It was a real pain. The epoxy just wouldn't set up. If we'd had we threw out the test patch, but if we had the little test watch there, we would have known whether there was a contamination issue coming from the rod they were working on or from, you know, if the test patch would have been good, then we would have known.
I assume
Somebody
you
threw
use,
it out.
you use less epoxy than more? When you're putting
You know,
it
that's a
on.
personal preference thing. You know, there's a couple of different types of epoxies out there. You've got low build and high build. And some guys like to have, you know, big old wad of epoxy on there. I mean, on like a musky rod or something, it looks kind of nice to have the, you know, the higher build. On ice rods, I generally go for a much lower build. I'm trying to keep weight to a minimum most of the, on pretty much any rod I build, I'm trying to keep weight to a minimum, so I don't want to have a whole bunch of epoxy on there. Where I will sometimes build it up is down, you know, down here, right up above the foregrip, because it's more of a decorative, you know, when I'm down here. But down on the business end of the rod, I try to keep it pretty light. You can get, another place you guys can get really creative when doing a rod is down here, and you know, you'll put like a, I got some components up here, but if you put a hook keeper on here, you know, I like to put hook keepers on a lot of the rods I build. You can do some really cool stuff with thread and get experimental down here and do, you know, some fancy patterns. You can spend, I mean, some of the guys will spend, yeah, Phil's shaking his head back there. And we got into this for a little while where we were doing all kinds of crazy patterns on our rods down
You get 40 hours into a bud wrap, you've done too much.
Yeah, you can get 40 hours literally just putting some of these patterns down there. You can draw pictures, you can do artwork down there by how you lay out your threads. And it's crazy, the geometry involved to lay them out. But if you go online and Google it, you'll see some amazing, beautiful works of art that these guys will do down there on their rods. Now, on an ice rod, it's really tough because you got such a small diameter that you're working with. But I've done really cool, like 5 of diamonds patterns and chevrons and just basic stuff where almost all you're doing is doing a crisscross pattern down there, and the rod will look really neat when you're done. You know, you can alternate colors and all that kind of stuff.
They make jigs now too to help keep your threads organized to help you
Yeah,
out.
yeah. I mean, back when we were playing, it was almost nothing other than numbers and we'd get out of a book.
You know, the setting it up from point to point, going down the axis of the rod, the smaller the diameter, the more critical it is to get those diamonds lined up.
Yep.
I wouldn't go anything under a 1/4 inch. It's just too hard to get 3 sets of axes going down that rod shaft 3 times around.
Remember, this is rod wrapping 101.
I hear you.
But suffice it to say, you can do some really cool patterns down there, and that's generally, if I'm going to do it, that's where it's going to be at. It's going to be right down there.
You could take it just a blank, a short piece of blank, I mean, a pencil, or whatever you want, and wrap some thread on it, run some epoxy on it. Don't do it on your finished product yet until you've gone through and learned how much of that epoxy you can put on. If you mix a 2-part epoxy, warm it up a little bit with some warm water before you mix it. And then mix it until all the bubbles are done. And let it set for a few seconds before you start putting it on. I use a toothpick to put them on. I've taken the brushes and I've cut the bristles down to a needle point. Because you only want 2 or 3 bristles of that stuff, you know, with the epoxy on it to go around that rod blank that you're wrapping. The hardest thing for me to do was to get the same amount of epoxy on each guy. Get some that were this big, some were this big, some were little, and they start to sag.
It just takes practice.
You'll see all of those little things.
Yep,
when
it
you
just
start.
takes it's all
Make
learning
a
curve.
practice, make a pencil, wrap some thread on a pencil, and do like 3 guides, 3 wraps on a pencil. 3 separate wraps. And then put color preserver on it. And then let it dry. And then put your rod wrap finish on it. Let it dry. And see what it looks like. See what mistakes you've made that you haven't ruined a good rod. These blanks are not terribly expensive, but you get a blank that costs $185. You don't want to screw it up.
Don't start out with $185. Start out with the $3 fiberglass blank. Another component that you're going to use that's going to help your rod look more professional when you're done and it's probably one of the cheapest things you're gonna buy is a little, what they call a winding check. Okay, it's literally a little cap that you're gonna put, this rod's got one on it, right down there at the base. What it does is it covers up, remember I said you're gonna probably leave a little gap down there, it's gonna be full of epoxy, you're gonna fill it with epoxy, but that little winding check is gonna cover that up down there. And also what it does is it covers up that starting point. If you're gonna do that little, they call it a butt wrap, it's gonna cover up the starting point of the little butt wrap, and it can be a little gnarly down there, especially if you're doing something real creative, because you're gonna throw all your stuff you don't want people to see right down there into that area where that little winding check is. You can get, I mean, this is just a simple one. These are just like a little rubber material that we sell for the ice rods, but you can also get some really wild looking winding checks. They make aluminum ones that are machined, that are anodized, all kinds of crazy colors, and they got different shapes. Phil has used glass or plastic beads down there, literally like a 10mm bead, just to be different, you know, to have it down there. So, but you can, again, you can get creative down here too. They probably even have some really wild wood ones, I would think, but coming to the top of my head, I can't think of where I might have seen them. But you're just trying to cover up that unfinished area down there to make it look more professional when you're done.
Those little cone-shaped beads they look like a little fluff.
Yeah, they're almost like a bell. Yeah.
Like a little bell.
Yep. As far as different guides that you guys might want to use, you know, as kind of a general rule of thumb, for a spinning, well, I should say this. If you're going to build like one of the new fly rod style, if you're going to build your rod so that you can use like a fly reel or one of these, like an inline reel or like our tight liners, you don't need to use any big guides on the ice rod. Okay, you almost don't want to use any big guides at all. You just want to keep it real simple. You can put very small diameter fly guides all the way down to the end. You could use snake guides, which are these guys, these little wire guides, okay? I generally don't use snake guides just because I don't like all that extra thread that I'm putting on there on the wrap, because these just have a little longer profile than like
Snake guides have 2 feet.
Yes, snake guides have 2 feet on them. It's actually a piece of wire that wraps around like a snake. And so you're gonna wrap one side, carry underneath and over, and then finish wrap the other side. This is generally the way that I wrap a snake. Some guys will wrap this way and that way, but I like to have the cross thread underneath when I do it. But what I like to do is I like to use this regular little single foot fly guides. And this one has got aluminum oxide core, but you can use just a standard stainless, or we've got some that have a titanium coating on them. They're very, very light, close to the blank. And if you're using an inline reel, especially like our tight line comes off the top of the spool, so it comes straight up and out right along the blank. If you're going to use a fly reel, then you can start out with like a number. This one's like a number 16. It's going to space that guide out. This one's probably a 12 on here, but see how this guide is down a little bit farther. You know, if I was using a spinning reel, then I'm going to use a little longer, a little bigger guide on the first one, just so I don't have such an extreme angle going up. You know, on an open water rod, if you're going to custom build it, and I'm only going to go back to the open water just to explain the difference. If you're building an open water rod, that first guide for like a spinning reel, it's going to be a pretty good size guide. Okay, it might be a 25 or 30 even. The guides are all, I guess, talking to 101 here, the guides are rated by size. The bigger the number, the bigger the guide diameter and the ID in like a spinning guide. If you get into fly guides, it gets weird. I'm not even going to go into the fly guide thing, because there's even a couple of different standards that they use. But suffice it to say, bigger the number, the bigger the guide for a fly guide. Smaller, your smaller guides are going to be like a 5 or a 6. Those are going to be down towards the tip. Your first guides are going to be like 12, 16s, 20s. On an open water rod, you're trying to get a big guide there for spinning, because that line coming off of that spool is coming off with a big helical on it, okay? And you're trying to tame it. You're trying to calm it down and straighten it out, and you're gonna slowly tame it as it goes down the rod blank, but you're gonna keep it so that it's not slapping against the blank. On an ice rod, you're really not doing that, and you're definitely not casting. So you're just fishing vertical. So you're really more concerned about just trying to get everything in line, not have too exaggerated of an angle going from your reel up to that first guide is the thing that I generally concern myself with. And if I'm doing a straight line type reel, the line's coming straight out, it's going straight through, so there's no worries. But I'm never going to go bigger than like a 16 for my first guide on an ice rod. There's just no need, in my opinion, there's no need for it. The tip diameters, I'll talk about that for ice rods too. Some guys like great big tip diameters, and some guys like really small ones. If you're a guy that fishes in a shanty all the time and it's really warm, you're not going to care if you have a small tip guide up there because you're not going to worry about ice buildup so much. But if you're somebody fishing out in the open all the time, you might like to have a little bigger. I mean, you might want all your guides a little bigger if you're fishing deeper water, just because you don't want to deal with the ice buildup. I don't pay a lot of attention to it. I don't like a really tiny guide. Like a size 5 or 6 for me is fine on the tip. I mean, but a lot of our factory rods will build them with 8s just because we're trying to appeal to more of the masses on that. I think there's anything also here I haven't talked about yet that I'm going to wait.
If you're using a reel on the rod to retrieve line every time you're casting, or if you're reeling up a fish every time you catch fish, then use a titanium coated tip top because it won't groove on it.
Yeah, especially if you're using.
You got to run a lot of line through it to get it to groove, but when it does, it's going to be bad because it's going to break line on it.
Yeah, if you're using, it's a good point. If you're using, especially for the quality of the tip top that you select for your rod, especially if you're going to use braid too. A lot of guys are using braid. If you're going to use braid, you really probably want to have at least an aluminum oxide or titanium coated tip top guide on there because most of your wear and tear happens up there at the tip. So on the rod. So and you can groove them. It's not as common for ice rods as it is for open water by any means because of just the volume of line that you're going to run through an open water rod versus an ice rod. Let's see, did I forget anything? I think we went all the way to
Practice.
yeah, practice on it. But as far as your rod goes down there, again, double check your epoxy on your test patch before you pull it out. Give it a good, really 24 hours before you take that rod out and fish it. After 24 hours, it'll be 90+% cured. Even if it's not truly 100%, you'll still be able to fish with it. I fish with them as close as like maybe 12 or 16 hours if we were building a rod really quick and going on a steelhead trip, but it's also hardening on the way up on the trip too while it's in the car.
Did you talk about how to set the guides on the blank before you wrap them?
Yeah. Yep. Talked about the rubber band trick. I think that's all I've got for you guys. Do you guys have any more questions for me? Kind of been answering them as we've been going along.
When I set my guide spacing, I take surgical tubing, I've got a little slice of it, and I'll put those little slices on the blank, where I think the rod guides are gonna go. And I'll take a piece of line and I'll run it under.
Yep, we talked about that, only I use rubber bands, but surgical tubing is another way to do it. Some mechanism, I don't like tape just because tape is too restrictive. The line doesn't move through it, flow through it enough. I know some guys will say that.
Get tape residue on it.
Yeah, I don't like tape.
For your epoxy.
The masking tape, you guys, don't buy really super cheap masking tape either. The masking tape is kind of my friend when I'm wrapping because I'm going to use it too to hold line when I'm not working on it. So don't get real cheap stuff because the real cheap masking tape will leave a residue. Just like good painters don't buy really crummy masking tapes. They don't want to leave residue on the wall either. So, that's going to last you so really long. Don't go cheap on your masking tape.
When you're putting the handle on, are you building up using the masking tape so that it fits fairly
Yep,
tight?
I do. Some guys will use a twine. I mean, there's if you talk to different guys, they'll give you a different methodology for different materials that they use to build it up. I've always used masking tape on it, but I'm not going to build up that whole length like.
No, I think you said 3 areas.
Yeah,
right?
I generally use 3 points, and this is what 3/4, 1 inch masking tape maybe,
That's
3/4. I'm going to have it right down at the end, just up a little bit below. I'm going to end up, I would mark this is what I would do. I'd actually put a piece of masking tape here and mark it.
I wouldn't put those separate tape bands more than 3 inches apart. That's my rule of thumb. If you got-
Yeah, well, on an ice
If
rod,
you're putting in the middle of the cork, then
Right.
you gotta have one under the reel seat, front and back, and then under each piece of the cork. front
if
and
this were going to be like an 8-inch handle, especially like an open water handle, I would have more than 3 points in here, especially on a rod blank this light.
Okay. And then putting your epoxy on the rod and pushing the handle onto it?
Yeah, it's kind of hopefully we'll get to that in the workshop a little bit, but with this had all the tape on there, I'll use sometimes a little piece of wire that I'll dip into the epoxy and I'll spread it on the rod blank and I'll slowly rotate it in kind of an up and down motion, and you'll see it drawing the epoxy, pulling it down. So I'll do that above and below each one of those tape points on there and slowly work it down until I get it down to the blank. Now you're going to want to be careful because you don't want to get too sloppy, because that little winding check is only going to cover so much mess up here. So you kind of want to take your time and be real careful about doing it so that you don't leave a big mess, because you're not wiping that epoxy up. The only way that epoxy is going to truly come off of there is if you sand it off later, and you don't want to be creating all that extra work for yourself. So just take your time and slowly work it down, put some more epoxy on there, work it down. The only place you have to worry about getting too much epoxy on when you're doing that process is really right when you get down to the very end, because you only have you've got that little gap in there that you're working with. And you'd be surprised, you can get it to, just by moving it around. If you do get too much on there, you can take a little toothpick and go in carefully and pull some off. But as you're rotating it, you'll see it smooth out nice and uniform. You're already going to want to have that winding check up here on the rod, so that right when you get done, you can just take it and slip it right down over the top, and it'll sit right on top of whatever extra little bit of epoxy you have there.
Okay.
I mean, that's all real learning experience stuff. After you get carried away one way or the other too far on your first one, you will remember it for your next one. So that's the fun of doing it. I got a whole bucket full of rods in the basement from practicing and building on.
The 2-part rod paste is a little more forgiving on if you have too much.
Is it? I haven't used the
Yeah,
paste
it's a
yet.
little more
So.
forgiving. You can actually wipe it off when it's really fresh, and
Okay.
if it does leave anything, it's a really thin, clear film that you can hide really easily.
Okay. Other questions, guys? Guess we'll see you at the workshop then, for those of you guys that are coming to it.
Thanks, John.
Cool, thanks for coming, guys.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Make sure you like and subscribe and share. It helps the channel. It helps me. It helps everyone who likes to catch fish.